decade following the Iranian Revolution, the new state apparatuses have taken shape in the violent context of a war against Iraq and through a widespread repression marked by a systematic and institutionalized use of arbitrary detention, torture, and executions. These practices were carried by organizations first created ad hoc by decrees of the Supreme Leader Khomeini with no legislative ground or electoral legitimacy. The paramilitary, police, and intelligence forces of the guardians of the revolution, the revolutionary committees, the revolutionary courts. These organizations, ruled by clerics and militias, have been legalized afterwards in 1983. By this time, the mass arrests and executions that first only targeted people affiliated to political parties in armed struggle against the regime were generalized to all the left and non-Islamic political parties. The affiliation to a party was understood in a very loose sense. A great majority of the prisoners were not active members of political parties, but young people supporting an organization by reading their newspapers, distributing leaflets, or siblings of elder activists. Prisoners' age ranged from 11 to 70 years old. I am not talking about the children in prison with their mothers. Most of them were below 20, most of the prisoners. My mother, Fatemeh Zarei, and my aunt, Fatemeh Zarei, were both very conscious of the political path they had chosen. They were the candidates of the Mujahideen-e-Khalq party for the legislative election of the First National Assembly in 1981. Their party did not gain any seat at the assembly in these elections that have been reported to be massively marked by electoral fraud. My mother was arrested during one of the many peaceful demonstrations against the deterioration of the political climate in '81. On the 20th of June '81, a terror attack attributed to the Mujahideen killed 72 officials of the Party of the Islamic Republic. The arrests increased drastically. And the demonstrators arrested in the months before these events were massively executed. In the next 8 years, dozens of prisoners will be executed daily. And other waves of group or mass executions will follow. Recent investigations by the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center documented 20,000 executions until 1989. Although, like in all other contexts of state violence, figures are not very reliable. A list of the names of 5,000 prisoners killed in the 88 massacre has been compiled so far. These severe human rights violations have been a public secret for decades. The mass executions were justified by a heavy state propaganda that merged ideological Islam and imperatives of state security. But beyond this ideological apparatus, human rights violations have been covered by what I call the circles of silence drawn by the state. The body of the prisoners killed under torture or in mass executions were not given back to the families. The families were constantly under surveillance. Their friends and relatives called for interrogation. They were isolated from their social networks and forbidden to hold funerals for the executed prisoners. So, to some extent, what happened inside the prison should not filter to the families outside. And what the families knew and witnessed should not filter to wider parts of society. For each prisoner killed, 10 Iranians lived in terror and 100 were silenced. However, survivors of prison massacres have published their memoirs in exile. A few officials like the Ayatollah Montazeri have testified, and human rights NGOs like the Boruman Foundation have patiently compiled hundreds of testimonies and reported on the 88 crimes against humanity, as did the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center. Hearings held at Amnesty International in London last June by the Iran Tribunal Initiative have gathered dozens of witnesses and put faces and life stories on abstract notions such as extrajudicial killing, arbitrary execution, psychological torture. It seems that a great majority of the victims during the 1980s were executed upon a death sentence issued by a revolutionary court. Even the 88 mass killings were carried after fast trials held by special courts traveling from prison to prison. This court was issued by a religious decree, fatwa, of the Supreme Leader Khomeini. The revolutionary courts were held in secret. Prisoners were blindfolded, sentences were not public, but their existence was legal. The fatwa ordering the 88 massacre had a legal authority, but has always been held secret. The special court had no legal basis, no official existence, but its members were part of the judiciary. So death was administered by an ideological and legal apparatus. Although discretionary, the killings had an internal logic. They were systematic and applied to groups defined by their religious or non-religious belief, which fits the definition of a crime against humanity. Since 2009, the Iranian civil society, which is a young society, 66% of the population is below 30 and has no first-hand knowledge about the 1980s. This society has been confronted again to disappearances, public confessions, massive imprisonment, etc. The prisons, the interrogation rooms, the revolutionary courts are the same. Many of the actors are the same. Some have been promoted and now hold high-ranking positions. The organization of the Guardian of the Revolution is stronger than ever. When I look back at what we experienced, our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, and my generation, I ask myself how overcoming complex layers of personal and collective amnesia can help us bound together civil society in and out Iran and be stronger. Experiences of mass violence in other countries show that a context of transitional justice and the change toward democratic institutions are needed before any serious investigation shed a light on what happened in Iranian jails in the last 30 years. This is true. But I believe that a history of violence in the Islamic Republic, even fragmented and incomplete as it is, can contribute to this change and empower civil society by exposing the practices, the culture, the mechanisms of the state violence that Iranians still face.
بسیار ممنون از شما.